Hi, and welcome to our new interview on our channel, Digital Health Inside Out. And I'm super excited to introduce you to our today's guest. His name is Amit Phull. Hi, Amit. How are you doing?
I'm great. Thank you for having me today.
Sergey, how are you?
I'm okay. Why are you asking? What's the problem here?
All right, let's get to the interview. I want to start a little bit going to history. And you're a rare case when a person has a lot of experience in being a physician, board certified physician, but also computer science major and working as a CTO at a startup. Well, first of all, tell us how that happened. And second of all, back in 2014, when you were beta testing Doximity, lead us through your decision process. How do you decide that you want to kind of jump from clinical work to startup world?
Yeah, it's funny. I do a lot of career advisory stuff for folks who are considering doing either hybrid careers in medicine or, unfortunately, more these days, folks are considering even departing medicine for other pursuits. And I knew from an early age that I wanted to go into healthcare, but then got introduced to computer science relatively early on and really, really enjoyed the structure of kind of the engineering end of the spectrum. I was lucky enough early in my career to be exposed to some pretty significant opportunities to do simple technical things that had really significant impacts on the clinical side. As an example, I'm dating myself here, but back in the day of Palm Pilots, we were able to use simple technology and program a drug database and give it to transplant surgeons for their post-kidney patients to be sent home with a Palm Pilot that would remind them when to take their medications. Simple enough that I, as a senior, as an undergraduate, could program it myself. But
without vibe coding?
Without vibe coding, believe it or not. And we had, patients were in tears because they were leaving on 12 to 18 medicines and didn't know what to do. Had just had a very significant operation and were kind of just left to their own devices. So for me, that was early exposure to how profound that gap was between the technical side and the medical side. Again, dating myself. We had dot matrix printers in the hospital. We had DOS command line order entry. It was pretty backwards compared even to the technology that was available back then. So I took the approach of just raising my hand for every opportunity to volunteer in this kind of overlap of the Venn diagram. And I wound up volunteering for a beta testing program that a new company at the time, Doximity, had sent out some emails about. And I think by virtue of that, it was just a random series of fortunate events from my perspective. I get invited to a medical advisory board. I met Jeff, who's one of the co-founders and CEO of Doximity, had a great conversation, and it was one of those that ended with hey, we're thinking about hiring clinical people who are interested in technology if you happen to know anyone. And I was just I'm standing right here, right? So it truly was a byproduct, and what I advise my students these days is if you're interested in something else, just raise your hand. The extent to which time and whatever else is going on in your life will permit, the more you raise your hand, the more exposure you get. And here I am, 12 years later, I'm still at Doximity, and the company has come a very, very long way from the early days.
For sure, yeah. And we're going to talk about it.
Yeah.
You remember Palm Pilot?
There you go, right? No.
Unbelievable. Amit, your role at Doximity is Chief Clinical Experience Officer. I don't think we had this kind of titles even a few years back. And obviously you've had several roles in the company through the years. You mentioned it was 12 or 14 years in the company. I'm just curious for our viewers, what's your day-to-day like, and how much is, clinical experience versus business versus product, if you can share with us?
Yeah, so I will admit the day, it kind of depends on the day. There are days where I'm having conversations with gentlemen like you, and that's not every day of my life for sure. But in the Venn diagram of Doximity, we have a commercial side, an R&D side, and then kind of strategy that straddles the gap between the two. And we take feedback from our users very, very seriously. So having a relatively unique position like a clinical experience officer, as the company evolved, we wanted to get deeper in terms of our engagement with our users, synthesize that feedback in real time. And it's not just a bumper sticker or kind of a phrase that we use. It's actually part of our DNA as a company that we leverage member feedback to help develop our product roadmap. So me and my team are regularly interacting with our user base. We have punctuated moments where we have these large advisory boards, like the one I kind of eventually got hired through. And then each and every day we're interfacing with those folks. And that primarily gets into, I guess, the Doximity assembly line is take that feedback, build product for our users, test that product, iterate, refine. If we can have reliable, recurrent engagement that drives value on the clinical side, only then do we ever consider monetizing anything. And that's where business and strategy will, on occasion, overlap when we're thinking about bringing new products to clients and partners.
I think it's hard to imagine people who've been in health tech for a long time that do not know a company called Doximity. But for some early stage founders who just got into the industry, just briefly, can you describe what company does?
Yeah, so we've kind of been revisiting this now on our Sweet 16 as a company this year. We have a joke internally for our own teams, and then ultimately for our medical advisory board, we created this slide of the eras of Doximity. And my wife, who's a big Taylor Swift fan, saw the slide and was like, oh, it's like the Eras tour. And she made a joke about it, and we tried it out with our advisors, and I got a laugh in the room. But when you look at the phases or the eras, they do kind of map to like 4 or 5 year chunks, if you will. So at the very beginning, the tagline for Doximity was, we're LinkedIn for doctors. LinkedIn was growing at the time. There was a signal to noise ratio in terms of other networks that were available, and we invested a lot of time and energy to be HIPAA compliant, non-anonymous, name identified, so you can actually conduct medical conversations and consume medical content. As we grew and we had enough people come in the door and claim a profile and kind of engage, we had the problem of giving them something to do. So when we asked our advisors at the time, information overload was a pretty acute issue. I would argue it's only gotten worse, unfortunately, since then. So we developed kind of newsfeed offerings, the ability to synthesize information, utilize profile data, kind of leverage precursor technology to what we're dealing with today, like ML, to like actually have a backbone that just saved clinicians time for seeking out information that would be relevant to their practice. And that was a nice jumping off point to really getting embedded with hospitals, large health systems, small group practices, et cetera. And then, of course, 2020 happened and the entire healthcare system changed. So we were in a unique position where at that time we were already one of the largest networks that, to our knowledge, had ever been created of US healthcare professionals. We got overwhelming amounts of feedback to try and provide a solution for the COVID reality, which was the healthcare systems were just shutting down. So that era became kind of the workflow era. We had, based on advisor feedback, developed a telemedicine tool that was audio only. It permitted clinicians to protect their cell phone number when calling their patients, which most doctors do not want to give access to their private cell phone number, but it was audio only. And in the early days of 2020, due to that feedback, we added video support. Went from 0 telemedicine visits at the beginning of 2020 to 63 million in the first year. So kind of exploded into a new era. And now we have entered kind of the AI era of Doximity, if you will. So the actual answer to your question is we do all of the above. Now, specifically focusing on being like a deeply embedded clinical workflow suite where folks can either in their practice, outside of their institution, or under the auspices of their institution, use any or all of our software.
Super cool. I want to dive deep a little bit into the culture of the company.
Sure.
And you've mentioned a lot of times, you talked about Doximity docs and dorks culture and an operating philosophy of walk fast but don't spill your drink, which is pretty dramatically different from Silicon Valley approach, move fast and break things.
Yes.
So in clinical AI, what would like spilling the drink look like?
It could look like a variety of things, and that's frankly why we don't want to spill the drink, to be totally honest. There are examples in the history of medicine where small things happened, and it was actually the reaction to those things that became these very significant shifts. And then on occasion, terrible things happen, and there are even more dramatic or profound reactions. One example of that people often harp on is a tragic event that actually took place, if memory serves, in the 80s right here in New York City. It's called the Libby Zion case. So there was unfortunately a young woman who came to a hospital, was admitted overnight, and was being taken care of for a headache and a fever. And there was a resident on call. Back then, resident kind of meant you legitimately lived in the hospital. You're a resident of the hospital. And the resident on call that night ordered a medication that interacted with the medicine that Miss Zion was on, and a series of events led to the outcome that ultimately was her passing. The impact that had manifested itself 30-ish years, 40 years later, when folks like myself were going through training, because it was concluded that resident made that mistake because they had been in the hospital too long. So that's like a singular example, of which there are many, that the healthcare system can embrace a new operating model and then futz it up, and then unfortunately all sorts of other things can happen. So when we talk about not spilling our drink, the last thing that we want to do is contribute to the broader house of medicine, if you will, missing the upside of AI. So if we move fast enough that we mess something up and then people clam shut and they don't permit the utilization of this technology, if you have the AI Libby Zion case, if you will, I think that would just be tragic. And when we talk with our users, clinicians are struggling with burnout. They're struggling to kind of stay afloat in a job that's getting harder. And this is a technology for the first time in a very long time that people are genuinely excited about, and they're picking up and leveraging to save time. If by virtue of just being overzealous, we compromise that by introducing error that's unnecessary or not living up to claims that are also not necessary, my worry would be as a clinician that we would force the missing out for everybody. So when we say walk fast and spill your drink, or don't spill your drink rather, it goes back, actually, I'm an emergency medicine physician, and my wife gives me a lot of grief because she refers to me as a non-emergent emergency doctor, because we are actually trained, even when responding to a critical scenario, you don't run. You move quickly, you can get there, but if you run, you show up disheveled. You're not ready to engage. So that, I think, is core certainly to my medical training, and I think it permeates our culture as an organization as to how we approach even what's going on right now, which is, I think, probably the most rapid thing any of us have ever seen in terms of the velocity that we're dealing with. We firmly believe that you can move fast but not spill your drink, or move fast and do no harm would be the medical version of that.
No, for sure. Do you like Taylor Swift? Just a random question.
Not the biggest fan.
So you didn't go to the ERS concert?
My wife is a big fan.
So I want to start maybe going into products a little bit, just so our listeners and viewers would know a little bit more. I really like your Peer Check announcement. I think it's kind of interesting. Basically, you're saying, look, we have this cool AI products, or I guess AI-related products, but we also have this human component where, I guess in the announcement was over 10,000 physicians who would look at the answers, review them, give their feedback. So it's almost like supervised learning, where they would say whether AI was correct or not, maybe add something. And obviously big names like Eric Topol and Regina Benjamin, former U.S. Surgeon General. But unfortunately, I don't know, for my taste, beyond this announcement, I didn't see any sort of follow-up. So still confused about the methodology. Are you still testing that? Because it sounds really cool, and actually maybe a great differentiator for you guys, because I haven't seen exactly a product like that in the market. But my question is what's next for that product? Do we expect some methodology explanation, maybe some peer review material published? I'm still not sure, for example, with these two great doctors, what are their conflict of interest? Are they with you, or is it part-time? If you could just give it a little color on that.
Yeah, for sure. I would say, I mean, the broad answer to all of that is yes, more to come on that front. It's early days yet.
Let's move on to the next one.
I mean, I'll be honest to both of you. Internally, when we try these new endeavors, particularly something as audacious as Peer Check, we will take bets internally amongst the leadership team as to what we might be able to accomplish, as to whether or not something resonates. And using it as a benchmark, though not necessarily the same thing, if you look at some of the publicly available statistics around UpToDate as like a knowledge corpus that's contributed to by humans, I've seen stats out there where they claim about like 7,000 folks who have contributed to their corpus, and covers anywhere from 14 to 15,000 topics. So we started this at the turn of the year, and we were trying to be humble and conservative about this. We wanted to get a couple hundred, maybe 1,000 clinicians to come in and help out with this endeavor. And man, if we could get a few thousand topics with some feedback and human review, we would consider that a tremendous victory, at least the start of something. But before our advisory board in March, when Eric and Regina were announced kind of to the membership as co-chairs of this endeavor, we had a couple months where we interrogated our own data, and a tool like Doximity Ask, or any AI tool out there, is synthesizes the actual public literature or the corpus of medicine. Well, that corpus is created by humans, and the vast majority of those humans are Doximity members. So when we reached out to our membership and asked them, hey, we'd love your help. First off, congratulations. Your work has contributed to this new exciting chapter, and we are seeing folks ask questions that your work is contributing to. The amount of positive feedback we got from folks was absolutely tremendous. And furthermore, would you be interested in potentially contributing to this? And in a very short period of time, we got north of 10,000 people to come in the door, and we're now floating around the 50,000 clinical reviews already being submitted. So I will admit to you, I was just wrong in terms of my internal bets. I was being way too conservative. So as it pertains to methodology coming at it and more peer review and kind of more information around this, it's actively a work in progress, so we can kind of release the successes that we've had so far, and frankly, provide more color as to the plans for the future. We have now this year, for the first time ever, decided to not have an annual medical advisory board, but we're going to do it twice. So in the end of August, we are reconvening this group of leaders to give them an interim update and come out of that with a more granular product roadmap. So expect some Eric and Regina level participants that are also part of this crew. And I mean, if I take my Doximity hat off and just as a clinician, I could not possibly be more excited about the idea that the actual clinical leaders in the country are contributing to this endeavor in a way that will give them a sense of ownership. We take it very seriously that we don't want technology to be done to clinical providers. We want it to be built for clinical providers, and we think Peer Check embodies that. So more to come on that front, for sure.
Well, it helps that you guys had such great penetration into clinicians' desktops before anybody else. So to have that reach,
yeah, I mean,
it definitely helps.
They're busy people, but just the effusive positivity that we received when people, I mean, you don't expect that, where it's like, oh yeah, my paper was used in an AI tool. Well, that's super interesting, and that was enough to compel people to be giving of their time and their expertise, which is awesome.
Sergey sort of took us directly to specific products. I want to do a step back. On May 13th, you announced Clinical AI Suite.
Yes.
And it got a lot of buzz on social media, and most of the people, outsiders, they're like, what is this news? Like, is it just repackaging every tool that you already had in one bundle, or if there's any new technology in there? So I think it would make sense to ask you to tell us, is there a new technology, or is it just remarketing and repackaging?
So I'd say a significant enhancement of technologies that we already had. And it's funny, we're in the midst, I think, as a company, I alluded to it being our Suite 16, we're going through a reintroduction of ourselves, if you will, right? It's more difficult in this attention environment, I think, to call attention to something that most people already have an impression of. So when we bundled several offerings into a clinical AI suite, it was more than a repackaging. It was actually stitching those components together with clinical workflow in mind. It came on the heels of some strategic partnership announcements as well that kind of extended the reach of our offerings beyond even just being Doximity alone. And then as we've noticed over the past year and some change, the partnership velocity that we have on the healthcare systems side is like nothing we've ever seen. And in the early days of COVID, we had an externality that forced people to reconsider how we would practice medicine. And frankly, not only Doximity, but certainly Doximity amongst a handful of companies were able to ride that wave, frankly, and develop institutional relationships because institutions were many times more open to leveraging technology in net new ways. The velocity of the partnerships that we're seeing with our AI suite is actually outstripping the velocity that we saw even in the early COVID days. So it's exciting times. Dialer, Scribe, our newsfeed, Ask, all of these components, we have kind of rabid cohorts of users that may not leverage other elements of the ecosystem as often as they could. And when you stitch those things together as part of a unified clinical workflow, most recently we've made it available as its own desktop app that has its own kind of features and functionality. It just brings the throw weight of the combination of all of those things to the front of mind for our user base. We wanted to get away from the GPT nomenclature, mainly because despite our best efforts, we had folks coming in asking us whether or not OpenAI owned us, and it just was creating confusion with users. And I'm the last person, nobody at Doximity is responsible for anything that OpenAI does, and who knows where things will go with them as a company. But when, again, asking our advisory board, how can we clarify what this feature within this suite does, we got a lot of feedback that folks really liked the fact that our features or our software typically have just very simple one-word names that kind of capture what they do. So that's where Ask came from, and then bundling all of that together and enhancing it was part of kind of a reintroduction, if you will. I will say the Ask component was significantly accelerated by acquiring Pathway, what now feels like 35 years ago, but it was just over a year ago. And in that very short period of time, or just almost exactly a year ago, actually, if memory serves, in that year of time, we were able to integrate their back end, merge our two teams, dramatically accelerate the feature development within our AI product suite, and it just made sense to bring it all together as part of one net new offering.
I think it's an important clarification for the audience, but I do have a follow-up regarding Ask and more on the technical side of it. So you mentioned, and not just you, like the core marketing claim for Ask is that unlike a large language model, it's grounded in peer-reviewed clinical quality evidence via Pathway's knowledge graph. So can you help me understand what's the fundamental difference between regular RAG system that runs on top of LLM and your solution?
Yeah, so I think some of the assets that the Pathway team had been working on for about 6 or 7 years prior to joining the Doximity team was an exquisitely detailed semantic graph of medical knowledge. So it's not only at the retrieval layer performing like a RAG operation, it's actually leveraging the mapping of all of those elements that the graph is comprised of in combination with RAG in order to up-level the quality and reliability of the output. We go a step further with Peer Check to try and actually leverage, again, the small army that we've been able to compile of human clinicians to check even that, because even that up-leveling of just basic LLM output is far from perfect, and we own that. Right. Doximity does not fashion itself to be a frontier AI company. We're not that. We are the largest network of healthcare providers in the US healthcare system that has a bunch of software that's embedded into clinical workflows, among which entails an AI offering that we think if we can add these layers of security, we can actually solve for the trust gap, which is when we ask our users the most significant thing that still exists when you talk to a physician who's skittish about where things are headed. We conducted a survey of our user base don't quote me on the date, but I think it was within the last 7 or 8 months. And 71% of respondents on a pretty large survey noted that their biggest reservation was accuracy and reliability. So we try and up-level kind of the simple technology play with all of these layers of additional guardrails, if you will, to try and close that trust gap. We're not there yet. We'll admit that. It's early innings from our perspective. We think we can continue to improve. Peer Check is an avenue through which I think not only can we further close that gap, but also give clinicians a sense of ownership in the process along the way.
Yeah, I think trust is the key word here. Just to clarify, you mentioned you have no association with OpenAI, but you do use OpenAI's, say, LLMs as kind of your base, right, for your AI products, right?
One of several.
Yes.
Our system is designed to be modular. I will be speaking out of my depth despite being an engineer 100 years ago. I'm certainly not an AI engineer, so I can follow up with my colleagues who can provide a much more detailed answer and follow up with you guys. But at the architecture level, my understanding is that we have the capability through non-data retention agreements with many of the frontier companies, as well as experimentation with the open source stuff that's out there, to effectively hot swap in on the back end what at the time is the best for the actual action that's being leveraged by a user. We've had, particularly post-integration of Pathway late summer last year, lots of experimentation on our end with this tight user feedback loop to see which models were the best for various types of functions. So OpenAI is one amongst many that we do leverage.
And also wanted to follow up, since you already mentioned the desktop application.
Yeah.
I think it makes a lot of sense to build that application. So first question is, do you see already like the statistics, how many doctors switch to the desktop one from the browser? And second, like, can you explain what's the angle? Like, are you trying to be like that medical assistant that when every doctor opens the computer and starts the computer, it's already there, running, and it's so easy to use? Is that the angle?
That's the hope. So switching anyone in medicine from anything to anything is a pretty difficult proposition, particularly when you're talking about an employed clinician that works at a health system, where more often than not, the desktop that they're working on is not their own. So it's very early innings as it pertains to desktop. I think it's only been 10-ish days or so since we released it. I think the holy grail there would be to provide an increase in functionality to the browser experience in a way that's still accessible where most of the work gets done. So when we look at usage at Doximity more broadly, and you incorporate beyond kind of Doximity Ask and Scribe, the entire toolkit, usually the split is closer to 80-20, 80% mobile. But when you actually look at folks doing clinical work, whether it be in front of a patient at their desk, synthesizing information between patients, there's an inversion in that. And we see 80-20, 80% being desktop. So what we wanted to do was improve that experience so it wasn't just limited to whatever the browser. I mean, if you've ever used a controlled workstation at a corporation, let alone at a hospital, it's usually not even the best browser that you have access to. So this gives us the ability to pull in additional utility in an experience that we have greater influence over, and we can combine all of that, and folks can use it in parallel with their EHR. In systems where we have a more deeply embedded integration, they can use it from within their EHR as well.
It's time for hard questions.
Oh man,
There's just a warm-up.
those aren't the hard questions. Oh man, okay, fair enough.
I just want to kind of give you my view a little bit from the outside. It seems to me that, with OpenEvidence and other players coming to the market, there is, or maybe I'm wrong, then you correct me, but there is, fixed number of pharma ad dollars. So these guys are in the same play. So it seems to me that what you're doing is a smart thing in a way that you're kind of diversifying yourself, perhaps with things like, actually, we talked about last time on our last show, your partnership with Adelaide that just announced, and you obviously mentioned Pathway, just, different plays, different products. In that case, obviously, I don't know, it's kind of cool that you're trying to get integrated to your system into primary care clinics, value-based system that Adelaide is so strong in. So am I correct in assuming that, and maybe you've been doing it all this year, is that, you know, you kind of perhaps feel the pressure of your kind of main revenue stream of pharma ad dollars, as I understand. And by the way, it's like so cool that we know all this stuff because we can just open 8Q or 10Q and can just read, as opposed to all these other companies that like we don't have no idea what the hell's going on. So it's like I'm pretty confident in my question now, you know. Anyway, but would you agree that it's kind of like a nice and like a sustainable strategy for a, you know, company that want to be around, to have this diversified place, maybe a little bit away from pharma ad dollar revenue?
So it's all of the above, right? So as we've grown as a company, going back to this concept of the eras, if we were having this conversation in 2019, we didn't really have an enterprise business. Right. So in a short span of a handful of years, by virtue of the explosion of utilization of Doximity tools and kind of the partnerships that we were able to embark upon over the course of only 5 or 6 years now, we have a very healthy enterprise business that's just beginning to hit that kind of escape velocity in terms of potential for revenue. Pharma business is one of our older businesses, but we also have a recruiting business. We also have non-pharma related sponsored content. We have market research. There's multiple revenue streams that historically the balance has been skewed towards pharma ad revenue, but given our breadth and given kind of the history that I kind of give the cliff notes of the land and expand strategy, we are now in a position and of a size and moving at a velocity that we can actually up-level all of those businesses in parallel. So as the broader healthcare system evolves, partnerships like the Validated integration are phenomenal opportunities to unlock true value, not only from Doximity's perspective in terms of top-line revenue, but frankly, moving the needle as it pertains to value-based care. I think we have a unique opportunity to do that in ways that competition in the space, when you singularly focus on whether it be AI tools or folks that are clamoring after pharma ad dollars, Doximity is many times more than that, right? Like we have multiple facets, not only to our toolkit and our ecosystem, but to the businesses that sit on top of them. And we're only beginning now to mature several of the other businesses as the pharma competition heats up, right? So I think it being a singular strategy would be doing ourselves a disservice. Like we've finally gotten to the level where we, as well as our health system partners, are engaging in kind of this net new endeavor of thinking about healthcare delivery differently. And I think the business opportunities there are very exciting as well. So the strategic play is frankly all of the above. Can we lean on our distribution, lean on our size, and lean on our technical know-how to actually be the leader in the AI space and continue to be a stronghold as it pertains to pharma ad revenue? That's the objective for sure. But in parallel with that, can we do all these other things? And that's what we're beginning to embark upon.
To follow up on that, do you think you're feeling more threatened by companies like OpenEvidence or, for example, OpenAI with their clinical ChatGPT that is also going, I assume, after the same pharma dollars?
So it's hard to answer that. I mean, going back to what you just said, the information that we've released is audited, publicly available information. So it's kind of verified in a way, and we're liable for the veracity of that information. Depending upon where you pay attention, it's often difficult to tell what's going on, to be totally honest. I myself as a person, and certainly nobody at Doximity, is shy of competition, right? I think competition brings the best out of ideally everyone involved. The threats, if any, are more just in terms of the activity that you see even in online spaces. And on occasion will take a tenor that is not tenor that I'm a big fan of, right? Like we're trying to do right by clinicians and frankly up-level the practice of medicine. We don't need to get in the mud in terms of false claims and shit slinging back and forth when it pertains to like how people conduct themselves. So the threats, if I see any, are more like behavior that I've observed of clinical people raising their hand and asking questions and being kind of like bullied or silenced. That kind of stuff we don't really like participating in. But from a business perspective, we have a very strong business. We have real numbers, and we have actual earnings, and we have a lot of growth in our rear view that we're leveraging now to reinvest and accelerate in new directions. So I think it's going to bring the best out of us, and hopefully will permit us, frankly, to really influence where things go in this next chapter. I'm of the opinion, if I take my Doximity hat off for a moment and just view it from a clinical person's perspective that understands kind of the technology end of things. If I go back not just to 2014 when I joined Doximity, but to 2004 when I was an undergraduate and I was studying computer science, I've been waiting for this intersection of these vectors so we can now say, how does this change the paradigm? Right? Just doing the same old shit more effectively or more efficiently or faster, I don't think is going to serve anyone. And now Doximity as a platform and Doximity as a company has grown to the size that we actually can release something, and I hear about it when I go to the hospital. So that tightness of production to impact, that window has reduced quite substantively. And I think we have the opportunity to do amazing things. So it's less feeling threatened and it's more feeling excited about what's to come.
Yeah, I mean, you're right. In terms of like numbers, I always try to be unbiased, like when I do my reporting, but like, you know, you have your public company, so we all know that you actually have positive earnings. It's volatile, obviously. You know, this year has been kind of different. It goes up and down, but at the end of the day, like, I don't know who else is actually making money in this space, honestly.
Yeah. Your guess is as good as mine.
And again, part of the reason is that, you know, obviously most of the market is private, so we don't know. It kind of goes into my next question, which I think it's I mean, to me, it's been interesting because I've actually been thinking about it for like 2 years, this kind of like framework. But definitely the paper that came out in Nature Medicine saying that general purpose models on their benchmarks outperformed specialized clinical AI. Your company, Doximity's product wasn't on it, but obviously OpenEvidence was Doximity, was Expert AI was on it, it was Google, was free app was there as well, which is kind of interesting. If you read the paper, there was no competition. There were basically two clusters. As you know, OpenEvidence kind of was critical because obviously they didn't come out very, very well. But to me, again, just to summarize, you know, this is as independent as you can get. This is peer-reviewed. They mentioned, oh, you know, this NYU Langone researchers, they may have their own agenda. They have their own product. By the way, they never mentioned the product, so it's like, what are you talking about? But my question is, I had like similar thought, and I had an article on my Substack in August 24, saying like almost the same thing, that like in my work, in my observations, it seems like it's becoming harder and harder to make sustainable business out of either fine-tuning or specializing, because all these frontier models are getting so much better that it's hard to catch up. And it kind of goes perhaps against OpenEvidence logic. Oh, but wait, it's like, we're taking that frontier, we're building on top of it. So shouldn't we be better with all this additional data and like special relationship with like New England Journal of Medicine and JAMA? But the reality is that, you know, that particular layer, in my opinion, being squeezed out, and it is, you know, to make a business out of it is becoming really hard. So that's the top layer, in my opinion. Like, this whole space, you know, OpenEvidence, Doximity is obviously part of it, up to date, other companies. It's hard to compete on frontier level, but also what was revealed, again, it's a long question, one of those long questions.
Yeah, I'm like, is there a question here? Like,
sorry. But anyways, it's getting interesting. What was also revealed, because there was revealed, well, at least to me, there was apparently going on, but like this base 10 partnership that they have, which is inference level, which is also not there. So you have this frontier models that's not yours. So you're not competing there. Then inference, where your partner, in this case base 10, is actually selling to anybody in the market, which you're also kind of don't have the moat. So if you, like, I don't know, it's a long question, but to me, I'm just looking for your kind of view. It's becoming impossible to make business out of being like pure clinical AI. And I think for you, obviously, all this diversification played we talked about, all these other areas. That's what's going for you. But to claim that you're clinical AI, I think it's becoming so hard, especially to make like bottom line dollars. But I'm just curious. It's a long question, but
If I were you, I would just skip it. Like, let's go to the next question.
but I'm curious about your opinion on this whole like development.
Yeah. So, as an observer from a clinician's perspective, even if I'm not speaking on behalf of Doximity, I found the back and forth around the Nature article, the best way to characterize it diplomatically would be interesting, right? It breaks my brain to think about talking around AI being this layer that helps clinicians synthesize peer-reviewed research. And then when peer-reviewed research comes out about AI throws a shit fit and has a big problem about it, right? Like it just doesn't make sense to me, just trying to logically pull a through line there. If I were to impose my own cynicism as an emergency medicine physician onto the whole debate, it would make me wonder, where it's like, man, the level of vitriol that exists and the perceived, at least from the outside looking in, defensiveness, it makes you question whether or not there is a squeeze, as you implied. I think from Doximity's perspective, we, as I mentioned earlier, we don't fashion ourselves to be a frontier AI company. We're a health technology company, but there's many other things that go on at Doximity, and we have longitudinal relationships with our users over their clinical careers. I mean, we have north of 90% of graduating medical students that use Doximity to help with their residency match decision. They come in and they leverage workflow. We're a publicly traded company in terms of our most recently shared public numbers in regards to usage. We have more than 1 million quarterly active users leveraging our newsfeed, more than 800,000 utilizing our workflow tools. There was one snow day in the middle of the winter this past year, or this past winter, where there's 720,000 telemedicine visits on Doximity in that single day, right? So what we would love to do would be to bring AI into this place where all of this other wonderful stuff is happening and up-level that experience. And I think that simultaneously permits us to not get caught in this effectively pissing contest for investor dollars that's existing on the healthcare AI end of things, but then also, frankly, leverage our core strengths, which are we've been around for a while, we have deep relationship with our users, we have deep relationships with the institutions where our users work, and we cannot be defined in this narrow aperture, right? So if everyone's entire existence nets out to be a feature that exists on Doximity, which is a collection of many other features that our users can also have access to, I think it also protects us from this squeeze, right? I'm not going to pretend to you that I have any earthly clue what's going to happen coming out of Anthropic and or OpenAI. I have friends who work in very high places in both of those institutions. 3 months from now, they could be doing space travel. I have no idea, right? What the implications are for that in a healthcare space, what I am confident about is that we have differentiators that are not just our AI technology stack. That is a component of what we offer, and providing that in the ecosystem that is Doximity actually unlocks the value in unique and interesting ways that I think will permit us to continue doing what we're doing.
Again, like I think some people may be upset if I don't ask this question, but I really don't want to ask this question, and you have your legal kind of rights to answer or not. But obviously, there's been going on this litigation with OpenEvidence. I think they started it, implying that some of your leaders used this prompt injection. You had a countersuit with their CEO. Daniel Nuttler been using some fake LinkedIn accounts, so a lot of to basically create some stories about Doximity that are not so favorable. And it's kind of back and forth. And again, I'm assuming you kind of perhaps denying what you guys did, and I'm pretty sure they're denying maybe theirs. But I'm just like, I always kind of thinking about these things and in a kind of big picture, just curious about your thoughts. Like, to me, it's so kind of so counterproductive. So, I mean, when it happens, it happens. You have to respond, obviously, as a company, or in certain cases, you may initiate a lawsuit. But I don't know. I feel like, especially like for me, it's just so counterproductive. But like for clinicians, for patients, for users, when they kind of exposed to this stuff and they read it, like what do you think they're gonna take away? Whether they gonna respond more favorably to you, to OpenEvidence, to like the whole space, or maybe because certain things were mentioned, they're going to be more cautious, or they're maybe asking questions. Like, what's your view on this whole kind of episode? And I think it's still going on, right? It's not like settled or finished yet. So just curious your thoughts to the extent you can share.
Yeah, I was going to say, so like, I'm probably not the best person at Doximity to speak with granular knowledge about the litigation itself. What I can say, though, is that I share your concerns, or it's counterproductive. I do think it runs the risk of just casting kind of a negative shadow on all of this potential positive upside that we've been discussing. From Doximity's perspective, I mean, as an observer or reader of what's available in terms of the public docket that's been filed back and forth, we reacted to accusations that were levied against us, and it's a work in progress. I don't really know how much attention people pay to things, to be honest. I joke with my wife, if you look at my social feeds, Epic UGM is like Burning Man as far as like somebody who logs into my LinkedIn might like conclude. I get feedback from clinicians that when they think of Doximity, they think about how we approach them to build product. They are not thinking about us as being a highly litigious organization. And frankly, this is not a lawsuit that we filed. We reacted to allegations that were purported against us. I honestly don't know what's going to come of it. My hope would be, even going back to the medical Libby Zion case, that we don't get so embroiled with this kind of stuff that we lose sight of the actual objective, which is to ideally expose potentially groundbreaking technology to clinicians in a reliable way, where we leverage trust and utilize trust and build upon trust, and ideally expose how we're doing all of this so clinicians can understand what's going on and not get caught up with, effectively, from my perspective, what is a soap opera, right? I mean, clinicians don't have time for that. I mean, one of our core premises is build software to save clinicians time. The last thing we want to do is participate in a TV show that is a distraction from the practice of medicine. That all being said, if somebody comes and attempts to besmirch our organization besmirch our reputation as an organization, we can't let that stand either. So that's my long way of saying my hope is that the time and effort that we've put into building trust with our user base and the process that we employ to build product for those same users will rise above all of this fray and present itself as like the core value that we offer as a company. Whatever happens with litigation, I'm watching with you guys, to be totally honest. I'll get random inbound from colleagues who do pay attention to that stuff. It's like, what are you talking, what's going on? And it's just like, I can't really comment. And I also don't know the details, thankfully, because I don't want it to be a distraction from my day-to-day either, right? Like, we are at the precipice of potentially changing how we deliver healthcare. That is infinitely more important than whatever is going on in a shit-talking war online, as far as I'm concerned. So we try and maintain that focus as an organization, and I mean, we have lawyers for that to manage the rest of it.
I want to end this interview on a boring question, and I'm fine to be boring, but people think that any questions related to predictions in healthcare AI doesn't make any sense, because the short answer is nobody knows. But since you're working in this field, like it's your day-to-day work, I'm just curious to hear your prediction, like 5 years from now, where is healthcare, how AI is going to transform it or not transform it, and like where we are with this.
Man, that can go in so many different directions. I have this slide that we created initially internally, but now we share it with clients and partners, where if you ask Nano Banana, draw me a picture of the impact that AI has had on healthcare, the picture is hilarious. I'll have to send it to you guys afterwards. It's a robot that's like teaching all of these humans who are just looking on in awe. I don't think that's the end point that we want to track towards. I think if we can get to a point where a constellation of tools front office, back office, in the hands of point of care providers, is permitting some of the things that have intruded upon the practice of medicine to be more in the background, then we will have substantively made an impact. Like when we first released what was then called Doxgpt on the heels of ChatGPT being released, so it was early 23, when we surveyed our user base about where the most significant time savings were, it was in documentation and administrative burden, and the initial version of Doxgpt was reflective of that feedback. It was actually just a writing assistant. It didn't have clinical reference as a component to it. When we asked those clinicians how much time they might save, they actually gave us a feedback that it could be between 12 and 13 hours a week. That is a ridiculous amount of time to save a very strapped clinician, right? I practice in a couple different environments in terms of emergency medicine, 8-hour shift, you can see 25 to 30 patients. If I have 12 hours extra a week and I'm just ruthlessly efficient and I put that all towards patient care, the numbers start adding up fairly quickly. What we subsequently learned when we interrogated the data was, despite it being a writing assistant, people were asking clinical questions. That's why we actually pivoted towards clinical reference as being a component. What I would love 5 years from now is that clinicians can walk into a room, TBD on ambient because it's so contingent upon technology working in a hospital. I'm an emergency medicine physician. I can barely find an ophthalmoscope that works in an ED, let alone a high fidelity microphone that can capture everything that's going on. But if the technology is working wherever it is that you are, ideally it kind of fades into the background, right? And the actual practice of medicine is what gets highlighted in that encounter. So when we study for boards, particularly in EM, there's oral boards that if you've never done that before as a medical trainee, it's very awkward because you are sitting across the table from a proctor and you don't have any actual stimulus. You have to elicit it by asking questions. So there's this like soliloquy kind of component to it where you literally walk in and say, what do I see? What do I smell? What can I feel? What is the chief complaint? And you induce a conversation that is a very pure form of like the practice of medicine. So if healthcare AI can actually steer us back towards that direction, where if you have 15 minutes with your doctor, 14 and a half of them are actually spent looking at each other, having a conversation about what's going on, and all that other shit can just happen in the background, then I think we would have made a tremendous impact on how people feel, the care we can provide, and frankly, the utilization of this technology being kind of part of the infrastructure, which would be absolutely amazing.
I love it. Well, we have a lot of other questions, but I think that's a good reason to meet again for another interview.
Absolutely. This is great.
Yeah, thank you so much.
No, thank you guys for having me. This was awesome.
Thanks, Sam.
Yeah, dude. Thank you.